Repetition. Today I'm going to talk about repetition. In this lecture, I will share with you how to use repetition to improve your layouts. Your book, the Non-Designer's Design Book, has many good examples of this, and I'm going to show you more examples today and provide you with some tips that I hope will help you on your infographics. Look at this opening slide that I created. How does repetition, I've used one word over and over and over again, but look at the ways I'm using repetition. I'm repeating alignments. I'm repeating colors. Interestingly, even though I've got these in columns, you don't really see the columns. What your eye does is it goes from yellow to yellow. So that shows what a powerful tool repeating color is if you want to move the reader's eye. Then we tend to see the white because it stands out with such great contrast on the gray background. And then we see the black. The purpose of repetition is it helps readers intuitively understand a layout. Now, this is also true of contrast. It's also true of proximity, and it's also true of alignment. It's true of contrast because contrast says, look at me first, right? So if it's saying, look at me first, that contrast is helping a reader intuitively understand what they're supposed to look at first. Alignment moves the reader's eye. And it creates hierarchy. So it tells the reader intuitively to go from here to here. Repetition does the same kind of thing. It helps a reader's eye know what's important and where the eye should go. But it does a couple of other things too. It maintains identity, branding. So if you are an ad campaign or a magazine layout, you may use the same typefaces and the same colors because people who see them will associate those very strongly with the brand. Think about National Geographic for a second. Now, maybe none of you have read National Geographic in years, but I think you can all picture it in your mind's eye, right? What is the key repeated element of National Geographic colors? Yellow. There is a yellow frame around every cover of National Geographic magazine, and it's been doing this for decades. This frame is so strongly associated with the brand that a person standing a great distance, so far from the cover they couldn't even read the words, would still be able to tell you that it's National Geographic magazine. So it helps with branding, and it helps you get the job done. Because when you design your infographic, for example, and you make a decision about what typefaces you're going to use, one or two typefaces, or you make a decision about what colors you're going to use, in other words, you're creating a palette of color and a palette of fonts. Once you've made those decisions that you're going to put all the titles, all the little subtitles in your infographic in a bold-faced Calibri font, you've made a decision. You do that once and you repeat it. So it's going to help you by making one decision or a collection of small decisions about color and type. It's going to help you design your whole infographic, but at the same time, it's going to unify it. And it's going to help the reader process your infographic intuitively. How do you get it? How you typically get it is with colors, typefaces, and your layout. Let's talk about colors here. This is the USA Today cover and type. Let's talk about all the things here. The color choices, color USA Today as part of its brand, much like National Geographic uses the yellow frame. USA Today always uses this blue dot. This blue dot, synced up with the logo, makes the logo far more memorable than it would be without that blue dot. When USA Today redesigned some years back, it was doing different colored dots, and sometimes it was putting different, like a moon in the dot, and it stopped doing that. And I think it was because it was hurting the overall branding of the blue dot. They've made a decision to use the blue dot. Now they're going to use it again. They're going to use it in the headings and the bars. So your eye moves down through the page where they want it to go. Repetition moves the reader's eye where you, as a designer, want it to go. Your job as a designer is to control the reader, to control what the reader looks at first, second, third, etc. When you look at this page, Contrast also does this, of course. You see the logo first because it's in the upper left and because there's a blue dot there. Then your eye moves over to this photograph because of the position of the photo next to the logo. If you see USA Today every single day, your eye might skip over the logo because it's used to it and go to the photograph. It would really kind of depend on the photograph here. This photo isn't quite as attention-getting as some other photos might be. Repetition. Fonts. This font, and this font are all the same. USA Today has made a decision that for its main headlines, it's always going to use this old-style serif font. And it's going to use the same font. I'm guessing, I'd have to study it more closely. It's going to use the same, forgive me, I'm looking at this and now I'm thinking this is a modern serif. And so this would not be the same because they wouldn't use a modern serif. As you know, you can't use modern serifs in small sizes because they're too spotty. So they've made a decision about what to use here. So they're using one font here, right? Repeating it, same font. And then they're using a different font here. And then they're using a sans serif font for some other headlines. Repetition. Go to the website. Branding. Identity. We still have the blue dot. We still have blue used throughout the layout. And it helps to move your eye across the top. Typefaces. As I discussed, well, in alignment, I believe, you see a lot of sans serifs on websites because they're easier to read or considered easier to read than serif fonts. Although they're using serif font, it really depends on which one you pick. They're using serif fonts for the text. But repetition, same fonts, same fonts, same fonts. So the designer, they have a template, essentially. They've made a decision about what typefaces, about what colors, about the layout. So okay, I haven't tested this out, but you can test it out. Go look at USA Today and see if they're not using the same left rail with pictures of the same size with a larger photo here in the middle. And I'm certain that they are using the top headlines always on the right. A template helps you make decisions, but that repetition helps the reader understand what's important and intuitively process the site. A magazine, a brilliant magazine, online magazine called Eater. Eater is a food magazine with many, many different kinds of content. They actually have a city-to-city guide about food, plus a lot of news stories and features. It's a very, very rich site. Eater uses red. Red in the logo, red across the top, tabs for the what we refer to as the verticals, and red in each one of these. So your eye pops around and it unifies, this red unifies their design as well as moves the reader eye. You see red used a lot in websites because it's a vibrant color and it attracts attention. And you may find yourself wanting to use it in your infographic. Let's think about my PowerPoint template, right? I'm using repetition. I'm using a template that uses Rockwell, a version of Rockwell for the titles and Rockwell for the text. It has a red bullet and then it has this red dot down in the corner. Now, I didn't invent this template. I have used my own templates before. This is one that you can get in PowerPoint, but I really like it because it's clean. It's not too fussy. It's got a design edge to it, which I like. But you'll notice that I use this template for every single lecture. Eric uses a different template for his lectures. Why do we do this? Because we don't want to make a different decision about every single lecture design. We want to make a set of decisions about one and reuse them. And another thing, without either one of our faces being on the screen, if you looked at a PowerPoint of mine and a PowerPoint of his, you would know which person made it because we each have different styles and we're repeating them to brand our own lectures. Branding and unity. But also, it's easier for you to understand. It looks familiar. And that familiarity is very important to readers, that consistency and continuity. Because you don't have to figure out each and every layout that I have. You're able to intuit the design. This is from a magazine called Travel and Leisure. And they did a special edition on 35 trips you must take in your life. And it's a great example of using repetition to brand an issue or brand a package. So they had a section of the magazine called 35 Trips. Now I'm going to show you several pages so you can understand how they're using repetition to tie it all together. They're using yellow brackets, a yellow tab with the name of the country in it, and a yellow dot. Notice how your eye goes from the bracket to the tab and down into the capital letter. We go to another page. Again, move some things around, a group of pictures here instead of one, but a yellow bracket, a yellow tab, and a yellow T. And here again, a yellow bracket, a yellow tab, and a yellow, what we call this a drop cap or a drop capital letter, a yellow E. But there's something else they're doing. Did you notice what it is? Look at the titles of these stories. They're all in the same font, a sans serif font. You see that? And same with the subhead, same fonts. And also, each one in the same size. So if this is probably 40-point type right here, and this is probably 14-point type or maybe 16-point type. So let's say 40, 16, 40, 16, 40, 16. Making one set of decisions, creating a template, and using those design decisions over and over. It makes it easier for the designer, but it helps the reader navigate. Repeated colors Move the reader's eye where you want it to go. And color is key in making bar charts. And a lot of you, I think, are going to be making bar charts for your infographics. Typefaces, you repeat typefaces, and this also helps direct the reader's eye. Pick 1 or 2 typefaces and repeat them. You don't want to have a bunch of typefaces in your infographic. You can use one. I know, I repeat myself. I'm repeating myself. But repetition helps reinforce lessons. So, as I've said, you can use one category of type. One typeface, and use different versions of that and create both contrast and repetition. Here, they're using different versions of this sans serif font, and they're using it here as well. And by the way, notice the color being repeated for the country names. So this is one family, one font name. I don't know which one. Let's say it's not Gill Sans, but it's similar to Gill Sans. So let's say it's Gill Sans. We've got Gill Sans Bold and Gill Sans Regular on every page. This infographic was created by a student last semester when everything fell apart, and a lot of students used Canva because they did not have any access nor the $150 bargain a year to rent InDesign. And so Canva designed this, essentially, made the decisions, but they made good decisions because the designers designed these Canva templates. This is using one font family. It might be Calibri, and it's using Calibri all caps, bold, and it's repeating that from the headline into the headings. And then it's using that same font, but in different sizes. So this is the explainer, and you understand it's the explainer because it's bigger. And then this is the text that goes with each graphic. Repetition, the layout. Remember how in alignment, I talked about turning your page into a series of units. This series of units, so each one of these is the same size. Design one, and you've essentially designed the rest of them. And then using color. Notice how the color pops your eye from here to here to here. Also, it tells you instantly that these are headings. You don't have to think about what those are. You know they're headings because they're in color, because they're in all caps like the other fonts. So this repetition takes your eye from the top, and then by putting this color at the bottom, it takes your eye down from the top through to the bottom credits. Here's a resume that I designed. I used this in the alignment lecture, and I'm using it again here for repetition because good design, every single principle is present in good design. I just noticed I have a little mistake here. I should have a space there. Okay, so I am using one font family. I'm using bold, all caps, and just regular versions of this font. This works okay. This color draws your attention, contrast to the upper right corner. But look what happens when I now use the color in the headings. Your eye goes from here to the name. We know that they're related. Remember building relationships. And then your eye goes down through the headings. We know they're headings without having to figure that out because they're in all caps, repeated, and because they're orange. And then I've used boldface to also repeated the boldface on the first line of every job so that intuitively your eye goes from one. We know as a reader that these are all the jobs that are highlighted in bold. And then alignment, of course, the alignment creates hierarchy. So the repetition is creating hierarchy, but the alignment is also creating hierarchy. Here is a layout, a page layout from Men's Health magazine. I adore this layout, of course, because it's a dog eating spaghetti. Look at the repetition here. Now, this is a much more complex layout, as a lot of magazines are, and this is from Men's Health, and Men's Health is incredibly mind-blowingly complicated in its layouts. If you're ever at Dillon's, pick one of these magazines up off the newsstand and just page through it. If you want to kill some time at the store, like I sometimes do, so I don't have to come home and work, just do that, because you'll educate yourself by looking at magazines. So one font here. And what category of type is this? Yes, you're saying to yourself, it's a slab serif, and you would be right, and you are so smart. So we have a slab serif. Same one here, but just a lighter version. Okay? Then sans serif. Right? Same one. Now, they're not using a lot of repetition of color. They've got pink here and red here and blue here. And I confess I can't explain that choice, especially the one to put pink instead of red around that box in that frame. But there's a lot of repetition here in the fonts. But what I want you to pay attention to is the use of color in this bar chart. Now, you know this because you look at bar charts all the time, right? When you use color as a key for the reader. So divorce, the blame game. Women, men blame their spouse. 44% of men blame their spouse, and 64% of women blame their spouse. Don't regret the divorce. 73% of women don't regret their divorces. This is kind of a sad infographic. And 61% of men don't regret the divorce. Color coding. Here is a hypothetical bar chart. Now, this is comparing, I don't know what, because it's fake, but we've got a scale on the left side and countries at the bottom. Each country has been put in a different color. Is this terrible? No. But I think when you see a different color for every bar, you assume that the color has some relationship to the country, and it does not. These different colors mean nothing. Better, if you're comparing like things, in this case countries, to use the same color. So now we're using green, and once that color is out of the way, we can pay more attention to the content of the infographic. Now, what if you were comparing two things in each country? Well, then you want two different colors. You want a color for the one thing and a color for the other, and you want to use those same colors throughout the chart. That seems intuitive, right? If you're comparing people with COVID and people without COVID in each country, you would use two different colors. But because you're only comparing one thing, there's an impulse to make them all these crazy different colors because that's pretty, but it's not really intuitive the way this is. So when comparing one thing, use the same color. In this chart, if they were only doing men, it wouldn't make sense to make this one gray and this one green. That would be very confusing. Use the same color. Here's an example of an infographic that a student of mine made 2 years ago. The win-lost seasons of 21st century Jayhawk football. Look how color choices here make this chart intuitive. This was very smart thinking in terms of using color. The wins are green and the losses are red. We don't have to think about that. Now imagine for a moment that the wins were all different colors and the losses were all different colors. You would have to work really hard to figure out this chart. And this infographic that a student of mine made in InDesign, by the way, which also makes a really good use of color. She's using a light gray for the background, and then her other colors are red and blue. She's used different shades of blue for one chart. Remember, she's comparing class size. And here she's comparing percent of students who've taken online classes. So smartly, she's not making these. If she made this red and this blue and this red, suddenly this would become much more visually confusing and you would have to think harder about it. But what's really great is how she's used red and blue icons. 18 out of 60 students surveyed have had a class in Fraser. So we know the red is had. They have had a class. And she's using the same key for the red for the students, number of students who've had a class in Budig. She created all of these icons, by the way. Oh, and here's another one, the numbers. She's using red again to make these numbers stand out and to cue the reader that these numbers are all related somehow. She is, by the way, just using one typeface, but a bold version of it also on this layout. Do you keep hearing me say one typeface? So at the risk of repeating myself, yes, I saved that for this entire lecture. Here's what I want you to take away. You get repetition with color. And don't, like typefaces, don't pick a crazy number of colors. Pick a color palette. 2 colors, 3 colors is more than sufficient. 2 really is sufficient for any infographic. 2 colors, 2 typefaces max, repetition, and your layout. Create units and repeat them. It makes your job easier, and it makes your layouts easier for your readers to understand.